There is a quiet illusion that most people never question. The more you think, the closer you are to understanding yourself. It sounds reasonable, almost intelligent. If something feels uncertain, think about it. If something feels wrong, analyze it. If something feels confusing, go deeper. So you do. You replay conversations. You imagine different outcomes. You calculate, adjust, reconsider. Again, and again, and again. And for a moment, it feels like control. But then something strange begins to happen. The more you think, the less clear you feel. Simple decisions become heavy. Small moments become complicated. And silence, once peaceful, becomes crowded. Not with noise from the world, but with noise from within. You start noticing it in the smallest places. When you speak, a second voice interrupts. Was that the right thing to say? When you act, another voice follows. Is this the best choice? When you pause, a third voice appears. What if you're missing something? And slowly, without realizing it, you are no longer just living your life. You are watching it, judging it, correcting it. From the inside, it feels like awareness, but it is not. It is fragmentation. Because somewhere along the way, you stopped being one. You became two, the one who lives and the one who observes, the one who feels and the one who questions every feeling. And that split is where the exhaustion begins, not in your body, not in your schedule, but in your mind. Because every thought that doesn't serve you doesn't just pass through, it stays, like a small weight. At first you don't notice it, one thought, then another, a doubt, a comparison, a quiet fear you don't fully understand. Each one light on its own, but together they begin to gather. And the more they gather, the heavier you feel. Not because life is harder, but because you are carrying more than you realize. And here's the part most people never see. You are not lost because you haven't thought enough. You are lost because you have never learned when to stop. Because not every thought brings clarity. Some thoughts only pull you further away, further from stillness, further from presence, further from yourself. And if you stay in that loop long enough, something even deeper begins to fade. Not your intelligence, not your ability, but your connection to who you are without all the noise. So the real question is no longer, how do I think better? But something far more uncomfortable, something most people spend their entire lives avoiding. What if the more you think, the more you lose yourself? Part 1, when thinking becomes noise. There is a point, so subtle that most people never notice it, a line you cross without realizing you've crossed it. At first, thinking feels useful. You sit with a problem and your mind begins to work. It connects ideas, it searches for answers, it tries to understand. And in those moments, thinking feels like a tool, sharp, precise, under your control. But slowly, almost invisibly, something begins to change. The thinking doesn't stop when the problem is solved. It continues. After the conversation ends, you replay it. After the decision is made, you revisit it. After the moment passes, you reconstruct it. Not once, but many times. And each time you go a little deeper, a little further, a little more lost, because what was once a tool has quietly become a loop. And the most dangerous part is this. It doesn't feel wrong. It feels responsible. It feels like you are being careful, like you are being thoughtful, like you are trying to get it right. But beneath that surface, something else is happening. Your mind is no longer responding to life. It is creating its own version of it, a version filled with assumptions, interpretations, imagined outcomes that have not happened and may never happen. You begin to live in two places at once, the real moment and the mental version of it. And the more time you spend in that second place, the weaker your connection to the first becomes. It's like standing in front of a clear lake. At first, the water is still. You can see through it. You can see what is there without distortion. But then you begin to touch the surface. A small movement, just to look closer. Ripples form. So you lean in more. You move the water again, trying to make it clearer. But each movement only disturbs it further. And soon, the surface is no longer still. The reflection is broken. The depth is hidden. And no matter how hard you try, you can no longer see what was always there. This is what overthinking does. It doesn't bring clarity, it disturbs it. It turns stillness into noise. And the tragedy is, the more you try to fix that noise with more thinking, the louder it becomes. You start to question things that were once natural. Simple actions begin to feel heavy. Even your own feelings no longer feel trustworthy, so you analyze them. Why do I feel this way? Is this valid? Should I be reacting differently? And in doing so, you take something that was meant to be experienced and you turn it into something that must be solved. But not everything in life is meant to be solved. Some things are meant to be lived, felt, observed, allowed, without interference, without commentary, without the constant need to improve or correct. Yet when thinking becomes noise, you lose that ability. You no longer sit inside the moment, you stand outside of it, looking in, evaluating, adjusting, missing it while trying to perfect it. And this is where people begin to drift away from themselves. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but gradually, quietly. Because the more noise you create, the less you can hear what actually matters. Your instincts become faint, your inner voice becomes distant, and eventually you don't trust what you feel anymore, so you think more. And that thinking creates more noise, and that noise pushes you further away. Until one day you find yourself exhausted, not from doing too much, but from thinking too much about everything you do. And the hardest part to accept is this: nothing outside of you caused this. No circumstance, no person, no event, only a mind that never learned when to be still. Because clarity was never something you had to chase. It was something you disrupted again and again and again, until the silence you needed became something you no longer knew how to return to. Part 2, the dangerous split when you are no longer yourself. There is a moment, so quiet, so subtle that almost no one notices when it begins. It doesn't happen in a crisis. It doesn't happen in a dramatic turning point. It happens in ordinary moments, moments that feel small, moments that feel harmless, moments where you begin to think. At first, nothing seems wrong. You are simply observing, reflecting, trying to understand yourself better. But slowly, something shifts, not outside, inside. Because without realizing it, you stop being fully present in your own experience and you begin to stand just slightly outside of it, watching, evaluating, adjusting. And that distance, however small, is where everything begins to change. At the beginning, it feels like awareness. It feels like growth. You notice your behavior, you analyze your reactions, you question your decisions, and you tell yourself, this is good. I'm becoming more conscious. I'm understanding myself. But what you don't see is this. There is a difference between awareness and separation. Awareness is stillness. Separation is division. Because the moment you begin to constantly observe yourself, you are no longer one. You become two. The one who lives and the one who watches, the one who feels and the one who questions every feeling, the one who acts and the one who judges every action. And at first, that split feels small, almost invisible, but over time, it grows. You begin to notice it in everything. When you speak, you are not just speaking, you are listening to yourself speak, measuring your words, adjusting your tone, thinking, did that sound right? Should I say it differently? What are they thinking about me right now? And in that moment, you are no longer fully there, not in the conversation, not in the connection. You are somewhere else, inside your own head. When you act, you are not just acting. You are evaluating your action. Is this the best decision? Is this what I should be doing? What if this is wrong? And so even the simplest movement becomes heavy because it is no longer just movement. It is movement plus judgment. When you feel something, you are not just feeling. You are analyzing the feeling. Why do I feel this? Is this valid? Should I be feeling something else instead? And slowly, you begin to lose something incredibly important, your ability to trust yourself. Because every feeling is questioned, every action is analyzed, every thought is followed by another thought. Nothing is allowed to exist on its own. And this is where the real danger begins, not in the thinking itself, but in what the thinking creates, a constant internal observer that never rests, that never stops watching, that never stops correcting, that never stops asking, is this right? And the more that observer grows, the weaker your natural self becomes, the part of you that once acted freely, the part of you that once felt without hesitation, the part of you that once moved without needing approval from your own mind. It fades, not suddenly, but gradually, quietly, almost invisibly. And one day, you begin to notice something strange. You are doing everything right. You are thinking carefully, acting cautiously, analyzing deeply, but something feels off. Something feels distant. You are there, but not fully there. You are present, but not completely present. You are living, but also watching yourself live. It's like standing in front of a mirror for too long. At first, you simply look, but the longer you stare, the more you begin to adjust. You fix your posture, you change your expression, you try to look better, and eventually you are no longer just being, you are performing. This is what happens inside your mind. You begin to perform your own life for yourself, trying to be better, trying to be correct, trying to be acceptable, even when no one is watching. And this is the part most people never realize. The observer inside you is not neutral. It is not just watching. It is judging, comparing, correcting, and demanding. It doesn't say just be. It says be better, be smarter, be more careful, don't make mistakes. And every time you listen to that voice, you move further away from yourself because your life is no longer guided by experience. It is guided by evaluation. You don't choose what feels right. You choose what seems right. You don't follow what is natural. You follow what is acceptable. You don't live from within. You live from above, looking down at yourself. And that distance, that separation, creates a constant tension, a quiet resistance, a subtle exhaustion that you cannot fully explain, because you're doing two things at once, always. Living and monitoring your life, acting and reviewing your action, feeling and questioning your feeling. And that split consumes energy more than any physical effort ever could. It's like trying to walk forward while constantly looking back at yourself. Every step becomes unstable, every movement becomes slower, every action becomes heavier. Not because the path is difficult, but because you are divided. And the deeper this pattern goes, the more disconnected you become, not from the world, but from yourself. Your instincts become quieter. Your natural reactions become uncertain. Your inner voice becomes harder to hear because it is constantly interrupted, overridden, replaced by the noise of analysis. And eventually you reach a point where you don't even know what you actually feel anymore. You ask yourself, do I really want this? Is this who I am? Why can't I just feel clear? And the more you ask, the less clear it becomes. Because clarity does not come from constant questioning. It comes from connection. But connection requires something very simple and very rare: silence. And silence is exactly what overthinking destroys. So instead of clarity, you get noise. Instead of direction, you get doubt. Instead of self-trust, you get endless analysis. And in that state, you don't just lose peace, you lose yourself. Not because you are broken, not because you are lost, but because you are no longer standing where you are. You are standing outside of yourself, watching, judging, correcting, never fully stepping into your own life. And this is the truth that is hard to accept. You are not exhausted because life is too much. You are exhausted because you are carrying yourself twice, the one who lives and the one who never stops watching. And until that split is seen, until that observer is quieted, until you return fully to the moment you are in, you will continue to feel something missing, something distant, something just out of reach. Not because it is far away, but because you have stepped away from it, from yourself. Part 3, the weight you don't see, why thinking drains your energy. There is something most people misunderstand about exhaustion. They believe they are tired because they do too much work, too many responsibilities, too many things to handle. And so they look for rest. They look for ways to escape, to pause, to recover, to regain energy. But even after resting, something still feels off. The body may recover, but the mind remains heavy. Because the real source of exhaustion is not what you do, it is what you carry while you are doing it. You see, thinking is not just something that happens, it has weight, not physical weight, but something just as real, something you can feel without ever touching. At first, it is almost nothing, a small thought, a quiet doubt, a subtle concern, something like, did I do that right? What if this goes wrong? What are they thinking about me? Each thought feels light, insignificant, easy to ignore. But the problem is, they don't come alone, they come together. One thought becomes two, two become five, five become 10, and without realizing it, you begin to carry them, all of them, at the same time. It's like placing a single stone in your hand. At first, you don't feel anything. It's small, manageable. You can still move freely. Then another stone, still fine. Then another, still okay. But you don't stop because each stone feels harmless on its own. Until one day, you look down and realize your hands are full. You can still move, but not as easily. You can still act, but not as freely. And the strange part is, you don't remember when it became heavy. This is how overthinking works. Not as one big burden, but as many small ones, accumulating over time. A thought about the past, a worry about the future, a comparison with someone else, a fear you cannot fully explain. Each one, a stone. And the more stones you carry, the less energy you have. Not because life demands more from you, but because you are carrying more than life ever asked you to. You are not just doing your work, you are thinking about your work. You are not just having a conversation, you are analyzing the conversation. You are not just living your day, you are reviewing your day while you are still inside it. And that split, that constant layering of thought over action creates friction because your energy is no longer focused, it is divided. Part of you is here, doing, acting, moving forward, and another part of you is somewhere else, thinking, questioning, doubting, replaying. And that division costs more energy than any physical effort ever could. It's like trying to run while carrying a bag you never needed. The running itself is not the problem. The weight is. And the more you try to push forward without removing the weight, the more exhausted you become. So you assume you need to try harder, push more, be stronger, be more disciplined. But strength does not solve unnecessary weight, because no matter how strong you are, if you keep adding stones, you will eventually slow down. And this is where most people get trapped. They believe the answer is effort, but the real answer is removal, because energy is not something you build, it is something you stop wasting. Every unnecessary thought takes a small piece of your attention. Every doubt pulls you slightly away from the present. Every mental replay keeps you tied to something that is already gone. And over time, those small losses become something much larger. You begin to feel tired even when you haven't done much, drained, even when the day was simple, restless, even when you try to relax, because the weight never leaves. You carry it into your work, into your conversations, into your silence, even into your rest. And this is the part most people never question. They try to rest without putting anything down. So even when they stop moving, they are still carrying. And so the exhaustion remains, not because they lack energy, but because they never stop leaking it. And here's the truth that changes everything. You are not tired because life is heavy. You are tired because you have made it heavy. Not intentionally, not consciously, but through every thought you held on to that you didn't need, through every doubt you carried that served no purpose, through every moment you stayed in your head instead of being in your life. And until you see that clearly, you will keep trying to fix your energy by adding more effort, when what you actually need is far simpler: to stop picking up stones you were never meant to carry. Part 4, the hidden fear. Why you keep thinking there is something deeper beneath all of this. Something most people never stop long enough to see, because on the surface, it looks like thinking, analysis, reflection, carefulness, but underneath it is not thinking at all. It is fear. Not loud fear, not obvious fear, not the kind that makes you run, but a quiet kind, a subtle kind, the kind that hides behind logic, the kind that disguises itself as intelligence. You tell yourself, I'm just trying to understand, I'm just being careful, I just want to make the right choice. But if you look closely, really closely, you will start to notice something. Every time you think too much, there is something you are trying to avoid, a feeling you don't want to face, an outcome you don't want to risk, a version of yourself you are afraid to become. Because if there was no fear, there would be no need to overthink. You would simply act, but you don't. But you don't. Instead, you pause, you analyze, you replay, you imagine. Not because you need more clarity, but because you are trying to protect yourself from uncertainty. And the mind is very clever at doing this. It creates the illusion of control. If I think more, I'll avoid mistakes. If I analyze deeper, I'll prevent failure. If I consider every possibility, nothing will catch me off guard. It sounds reasonable, it sounds safe, but it comes at a cost, because the more you try to control everything, the less you are able to move. You become like someone standing at the edge of the ocean, watching the waves, studying them, measuring their rhythm, analyzing their patterns, waiting for the perfect moment to step in. But that moment never comes because the ocean is never perfectly still. And life is no different. There will always be uncertainty, always be risk, always be things you cannot predict. And if your mind is waiting for complete certainty before you act, you will remain exactly where you are, thinking endlessly. And here's the deeper truth. Overthinking is not a search for the right answer. It is a resistance to the unknown. You're not trying to understand life. You are trying to make it predictable. You are not trying to find clarity. You are trying to eliminate risk. But clarity does not come from eliminating uncertainty. It comes from moving through it. And this is what fear does. It keeps you in your head because in your head you feel safe. No real consequences, no real exposure, no real vulnerability. Only scenarios, simulations, possibilities. You can replay things, edit them, control them. But the moment you step into real life, you lose that control. And that loss of control is what fear tries to avoid. So it keeps you thinking, keeps you analyzing, keeps you preparing for a moment that never fully arrives. And while you are doing that, life continues without you fully in it. Opportunities pass, moments fade, experiences move on, not because you are incapable, not because you are not ready, but because you are still trying to feel ready. And readiness does not come from thinking, it comes from doing. But doing requires something that thinking avoids. Risk, the risk of being wrong, the risk of being seen, the risk of failing, the risk of not being perfect. And so instead of facing those risks, you stay where it feels safer, inside your mind. And this is where the cycle deepens. The more you avoid action, the more you think. The more you think, the more fear grows. The more fear grows, the harder it becomes to act. Until eventually thinking becomes your default state. Not because you want it to be, but because it feels safer than the alternative. And yet, that safety is an illusion. Because while you are protecting yourself, you are also limiting yourself. You are avoiding mistakes, but also avoiding growth. You are avoiding discomfort, but also avoiding life. And slowly, that avoidance turns into something else. A quiet frustration, a subtle dissatisfaction, a feeling that something is missing. Not because life is empty, but because you are not fully stepping into it. And here's the truth most people spend years avoiding. You cannot think your way into clarity if fear is what drives your thinking, because fear does not seek truth. It seeks safety, and safety keeps you still. So the question is no longer, how do I think better, but something far more honest. What am I afraid to face that keeps me thinking? Because the moment you see that clearly, the thinking begins to lose its power. Not because you force it to stop, but because you no longer need it to protect you. And in that space, something new begins to appear. Not more thoughts, but something quieter, something steadier, something that does not come from fear. The beginning of clarity. Part 5, The Quiet Mind, How People Who Think Less See More. There is a misunderstanding that runs deeper than most people realize. We assume that those who think less understand less, that if someone is calm, they must be unaware. If someone is quiet, they must be missing something. But the truth is often the opposite. The people who seem the most grounded, the most clear, the most at ease are not the ones thinking the most. They are the ones who have learned when to stop. Because clarity does not come from adding more thoughts. It comes from removing what is unnecessary. You see, there is a difference between a mind that is active and a mind that is noisy. An active mind knows when to engage. A noisy mind never stops. And those who have found a certain kind of inner stability did not achieve it by thinking more. They achieved it by trusting more. Not blindly, not recklessly, but quietly. They trust their first response. They trust their natural reaction. They trust the moment before the second voice appears. Because they understand something most people miss. The first response comes from alignment. The second often comes from fear. So instead of chasing every thought, they let most of them pass. Like someone sitting beside a river, watching the current flow. They don't jump into every stream. They don't chase every movement. They don't try to control the direction of the water. They simply observe without attaching. And because of that, the water remains clear. Their mind remains light. Their energy remains intact. This is what makes them different. Not intelligence, not talent, but simplicity. They do not complicate what is already clear. They do not analyze what does not need analysis. They do not question what is already known within. And when a decision comes, they do something that feels almost unfamiliar to those who overthink. They decide, and then they stop. They don't revisit it 10 times. They don't replay it endlessly. They don't ask themselves, what if I was wrong? Not because they are always right, but because they understand something deeper. No decision becomes clearer through endless doubt. At some point, clarity comes from commitment, from stepping into the choice instead of circling around it. And this is where most people struggle. They believe they need to feel certain before they act. But those who move forward understand the opposite. You don't feel certain and then act. You act and then clarity follows. Because clarity is not something you think into existence. It is something that reveals itself through movement, through experience, through action, through being inside the moment instead of standing outside of it. And this is why those who think less often see more, because they are not trapped in interpretation. They are not lost in analysis. They are not divided by constant self-observation. They are here, fully, in what they are doing, in what they are experiencing, in what is actually happening. Not in what might happen, not in what could go wrong, not in what others might think. And that presence creates something very rare, a kind of quiet confidence, not loud, not forced, but steady, because it is not built on perfect decisions. It is built on trust. Trust that they can respond, trust that they can adapt, trust that even if something goes wrong, they will still be okay. And that trust removes the need to overthink, because overthinking is often just a lack of trust disguised as caution. So instead of trying to control everything, they move with what is. They do what is in front of them. They respond to what is real. They let go of what is not necessary. And in doing so, they carry less doubt, less noise, less weight. And because they carry less, they move freely. Not faster, not more aggressively, but more naturally, like water flowing downhill. Not forced, not resisted, simply following the path without questioning every step. And this is the shift that changes everything. Not learning how to think more, but learning how to interfere less, because your life was never meant to be controlled at every moment. It was meant to be lived. And the moment you stop trying to manage every thought, every outcome, every possibility, you begin to feel something return. Something quiet, something steady, something that was always there but hidden beneath the noise. A sense of direction that does not come from thinking, but from being fully where you are. Part 6, the return, learning to step out of your mind. At some point, you begin to see it. Not as an idea, not as something you read or hear, but as something you recognize within yourself. The noise, the weight, the constant movement of thought that never truly stops. And once you see it clearly, you cannot unsee it. You start to notice how often you are not here. Your body is present, but your mind is somewhere else. In the past, replaying something that has already happened. In the future, imagining something that has not yet arrived, or somewhere in between, analyzing, questioning, trying to figure things out. And in that realization, a question quietly appears, not, how do I think better? But how do I stop being pulled by every thought? Because the problem was never thinking itself. The problem was believing every thought deserves your attention. And this is where the shift begins. Not by force, not by trying to silence your mind completely, but by seeing something simple. You are not your thoughts. They appear, they move, they pass, but they are not you. And once you begin to notice that, something changes. A small gap appears between you and what you think. Before, every thought pulled you in. Now, some thoughts begin to pass without taking you with them, like clouds moving across the sky. You see them, but you don't chase them. And in that space, you begin to feel something unfamiliar. Lightness. Not because your life is easier, but because you are no longer carrying everything that appears in your mind. And from that space, a different way of living begins to emerge. Not complicated, not overwhelming, but simple. It starts with something very small: noticing. The next time a thought appears, instead of following it immediately, you pause. Not to fight it, not to push it away, but simply to see it. This is a thought. And that alone creates distance, because when you see a thought as a thought, it loses its power to control you. You no longer have to believe it. You no longer have to follow it. You can simply let it be. And then you turn to something real: your breath, the movement of your body, the moment in front of you. Not because these things are special, but because they are here. And every time you return, you step out of the loop, even if just for a few seconds. And those seconds matter more than you think, because each time you do this, you weaken the habit of overthinking. Not by fighting it, but by not feeding it. And slowly, something begins to change. You start to act without analyzing every step. You start to feel without questioning every emotion. You start to move through your day without needing to control every outcome. Not perfectly, not all at once, but gradually. And that is enough, because this is not about becoming someone new. It is about returning to what was always there, before the noise, before the constant analysis, before the need to understand everything. A quieter state, a steadier presence, where you don't need to think your way through life to feel okay. And here's the part most people overlook. You don't need to remove every thought. You only need to stop holding on to them, because thoughts will always come. But suffering comes from staying with them, from repeating them, from believing them without question. And when that habit begins to loosen, something else takes its place. Not more thinking, but clarity. Not because you searched for it, but because you stopped covering it. And in that clarity, decisions feel simpler, actions feel lighter, moments feel more real. Not because life has changed, but because you are finally inside it. Not outside, watching. Not above, judging, but within. And from there, everything becomes different. Not perfect, but true. And that is where thinking finally returns to its rightful place. Not as something that controls you, but as something you use only when needed, and then you let it go. Again and again and again. Until one day, without even noticing when it happened, you are no longer trying to escape your mind, because you are no longer trapped inside it. Conclusion: when silence returns, so do you. At the end of all of this, after the noise, after the endless thinking, after the constant need to understand everything, you begin to see something clearly. You were never lost, not in the way you thought. You didn't lose your direction because life was too complex. You didn't lose yourself because you weren't trying hard enough. You lost yourself in the space between thoughts, in the constant movement of your mind, in the endless effort to figure everything out, in the quiet habit of never allowing anything to simply be, because somewhere along the way you started to believe that every thought mattered, that every question needed an answer, that every feeling needed to be explained. And so you kept going, thinking more, analyzing deeper, trying harder, not realizing that the more you added, the further you moved away, away from stillness, away from clarity, away from yourself. But now, something is different. Not because you found all the answers, but because you no longer need them. You begin to understand that clarity was never hidden. It was simply covered by noise, covered by doubt, covered by thoughts that were never meant to stay. And the moment you stop holding on to all of them, something returns. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but quietly. A sense of space, a sense of lightness, a sense of being exactly where you are, without needing to change it, without needing to fix it, without needing to understand it completely. And in that space, you reconnect with something you didn't even realize you lost. Yourself. Not the version shaped by overthinking, not the version filtered through fear, but the one that exists before all of that. The one that knows how to move, how to feel, how to respond, without needing permission from the mind. And from there, life becomes different. Not easier, not perfect, but real. Because you are no longer standing outside of it. You are inside it, fully. And that changes everything. So, in the end, this was never about learning how to think more clearly. It was about learning how to let go of what was never needed, to put down the weight you kept carrying, to stop chasing every thought that appeared, and to return again and again to something much simpler. This moment. Because the truth is, you were never meant to understand everything. You were meant to live it. And sometimes the clearest mind is not the one that thinks the most, but the one that finally becomes quiet.